Good afternoon. So we'll get started on our final session in this room today, and we've entitled it Putting Data to Work. But before I begin, I'll introduce myself and some of the colleagues that we have in the room here. We have a number of folks who are actually helping us work on this. So I'm Chris McCready. I'm with the Department of Water Resources, have been for quite some time. I come from a civil engineering background, but have recently found myself working on data with the Integrated Data and Analysis branch, where we do data management, we do economics, and we do analytics, and so modeling and analytics. So it's a good group I get to work with, and thank goodness they're a good group, because they know a lot more about what they do than I may ever know. They'll forget more than I'll ever know. So anyway, I am the chief of our Integrated Data and Analysis branch, and with the passage of AB 1755, that's become one of my primary focal points for my work. But I'm going to ask you, Matt, to introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, Matt Correa. I work in the Integrated Data and Analysis branch and have the pleasure of getting to work on implementation of AB 1755. One of the highlights is getting to work on the strategic plan to guide both implementation of AB 1755, but also looking at where do we want to be in the long term from a visionary standpoint for data management and data exchange within the state.
And I might ask Rafa, who is not expected to present, but because he's been very engaged with us on the AB 1755, if you don't mind, just say a few words.
So AB 1755 required the State Water Board, the Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Water Resources, and the Water Quality Monitoring Council to participate in creating this platform where we all going to share data and information. So we're working on developing the protocols and the strategic plan, which is a challenge. We all have different data sets in different formats with different information that is related to water. So it's a great effort of collaboration.
And that is something I really do want to highlight. It's been probably the biggest pleasure, besides getting to know my new staff that I've just started to work with in the last year, the other big pleasure for me in the work I'm doing is the interagency cooperation that I've seen. It's really come a long way. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the legislation was passed or signed by the governor just almost exactly a year ago. It was September 23rd, and I'll advance the slides. September 23rd of last year, our governor signed the Open and Transparent Water Data Act into law, and over the intervening months since then, and we've been working around in the background trying to figure out how we were going to get this done and who we'd need to work with, and I'm just really thrilled to say that the water boards have been a very enthusiastic partner, and we're very pleased to work with them. Yeah, no, very enthusiastic. And he's acting it out, but it's true. And we've also enjoyed our relationships that we're building with the Fish and Wildlife and also the Council, California Water Quality Monitoring Council, and several other agencies that aren't specifically named in the legislation, but who have a strong stake in the work and also have stepped up to try and join us in solution. So without further ado, and I should ask, do we have folks on the web or call or whatever? Yes, we do. Okay. Okay. Very good.
So far, we've had 0 questions from our online folks.
Okay. Okay. So far, 0 questions from online folks is what Jennifer's telling me, but we'll try and keep an eye on it. If you have questions, we'll make sure we bring them up. And before we get really going in earnest, I'd like to just get a quick sense of who's here with us today. So quickly, if you are with a state agency, please raise your hand. That's a good lot of us, actually, which is good because you all probably have a stake or possible commitment in AB 1755, so it's good to see you're here. And then we also have, I know, at least a couple of folks from the consulting sector. Quick show of hands from our consultant friends. Great. Good to have you here. And how about local? Do we have local? Great. Good. And who am I forgetting? Any participants in IRWM? I always like to ask that. It's just my... Good, good. Okay, welcome. You're some of my favorite people. Okay, so we'll get started. If I'm forgetting any sectors, somebody holler. Otherwise, we'll get going. There was a sort of a presumption or a statement up front in the language of AB 1755, which was penned by Assemblymember Dodd, that California's water resource-related data sets are difficult to identify, access, and use. And its corollary that centralized access to data would allow for better water management, well, planning, management, and decision-making. And that stands to reason. I think we all like to think if you're, oh, I forgot to ask, who are the, what was the phrase, data nerds? What was the phrase that Lisa used this morning? Let's call them data enthusiasts. Are you a data enthusiast? Great. Okay, I have to assume that's what brought you here. But we all, as enthusiasts for data, probably appreciate the value that data brings to decision making in any context, but in particular, something so critical as water management in California. And yet we know, I think it's safe to say, that a number of folks who have the responsibility to make decisions having to do with water may or may not know about what data is available, how to access it, where to find it, what to do with it, how do they turn that data into information, and so on. So a lot of those decisions are probably made from a perfectly good motivation, but without the benefit of data. So that's the presumption that brought us to the existence of AB 1755. So we in the state are embracing 1755 as an opportunity to integrate and increase access to water data that's collected by governmental agencies. And we hope more, but we're only at this point required to share government collected data. But we hope that this will foster collaboration among state agencies. I would argue that it already has been. We are expecting that it will create opportunities to share and integrate data sets and perhaps minimize the duplication of effort that may be happening now because folks aren't necessarily pulling together, don't know about one another. And also the water or the quality of the data sets. We are hoping that we will be able to improve water resources management and operations through data-driven decision-making. And of course, we always want to move toward more transparency and accountability in government. I've mentioned some of our partners already. Those first three up there are the ones that were named in the legislation besides DWR. So the control boards, Fish and Wildlife, and the council. But also we've had a great partner in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. We're working with Government Operations Agency, also known as GovOps, and they are actually close partners with the state water boards already on data liberation. That's the phrase that our friends at the boards use, data liberators. We also are working with the California Natural Resources Agency, and we can talk more about how DWR and the agency are related and what we're doing. The Delta Stewardship Council is joining us more recently, and also, of course, we're working with academia, and we talk more about that later in the presentation. And there are a number of other partners that we hope to bring into the fold, including all of you. So the legislation is full of deadlines, and most of them are virtually tomorrow. So by January 1st of 2018, DWR is expected to publish a strategic plan for data management. That's what Matt was talking about earlier, to guide implementation of the Act. Also by that date, we are to publish protocols for data sharing. This is the list of the legislation. Data sharing, documentation, quality control, public access, and it goes on to add promotion of open source platforms and decision support tools related to water data. And also, by the way, by January 1st, we are to submit, DWR has an obligation to submit a report to legislature on those protocols. Then a few months later, DWR is to release any requests for proposals necessary for platform development. And then later, September 1st of 2019, then there are certain data sets that are having to do with state-held water and ecological data. And then 11 months later, then some other data sets, mostly federal, but not exclusively. And I actually have a list of those coming up. So the legislation specifically named or describes some data sets, and I won't bore you with reading them, but basically state water project operations, the board's CDN on water rights, water diversion, water quality, fish abundance and distribution from CDFW, and then I'm sorry, there are some federal sets here, USGS, USBR, and then some other fisheries from the fisheries agencies at the federal level. Then, as I mentioned, August, there was some data related to water. This is how the legislation is phrased, so it is somewhat open-ended, but data related to California water supply and management held by the Bureau, Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, USGS, and Forest Service. So it's quite a list that's implied, not explicitly stated, but so an inventory will obviously have to be done. You know, I don't know that there would be any questions, but I'll pause for a minute and give you a chance to ask questions about the slides I've already covered, and then we can get into where we're going with the implementation. Okay, good. All right, so our implementation, we're jumping, we're checking the web too. As I mentioned, January 1st is just practically tomorrow for us, and while we've done a lot of footwork and background work in the last 10 months or so, or the prior 10 months before the turn of the fiscal year, we only finally became funded with the 2017-18 fiscal year in July. And I will say that the funding is extremely limited. So we're doing what we can to deliver with very, very little committed resources. But so far, I'm pleased with the progress, and all the folks that we've talked to so far seem pleased with where we're going as well. And so we want to get your thoughts on these things. But the strategic plan, we have some guiding principles that are just under development here. And I actually want to double check. I think most of these are somewhat inspired by the Aspen Dialogue series. Let me pause here. Have any of you been following the Aspen Dialogue series? They recently released a document called Internet of Water. Yeah, one in the back. Okay, a couple of you. If you haven't looked at that and you're interested in looking at that, I would encourage you to, because it's, in my opinion, it's brilliantly written. It's, as somebody who doesn't come from a long IT or data background, it's very plain language, very accessible, but contains some very reasonable findings that are maybe not easy to implement, but clearly stated. And so these concepts come from there, and these are just works in progress for us, but it's as a starting point, we want to say that from our perspective, data should be open by default. Obviously, there will be exceptions. Some of the data that we all know about is held back, restricted, or limited for specific reasons. No questions. Okay. We believe that by default, it should be open, but also discoverable and digitally accessible. Vigorous nodding from the enthusiastic partner from the boards. Openness and transparency. We share what we're doing freely with our partners in the public. By doing so, we invite others to tell us why our approach may or may not be right and how it could be better. So these are some of the sort of fundamental principles that we intend to embody. User-based approach will maximize the value of water data. Open data platform and protocols will evolve in response to user demand. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but the truth is that what we could invent by the deadlines in the legislation might be amazing, but will easily be improved upon as the IT sector continues to make improvements and matures. So we know it will evolve. We also know that we can only anticipate so many uses of data as the data also perhaps becomes more voluminous on the system, or as users become more acclimated to using data to make decisions, they might be asking different questions than we're asking today. We're looking for an innovative approach, an innovative application, so we can totally expect that user demand will shift over time. Control and responsibility. This is the fourth of the guiding principles that we're kind of noodling around with. Control and responsibility over data is best maintained by data producers, who are responsible for sharing data of known quality and documenting essential metadata. And we're saying that end users bear the final responsibility for determining whether data is fit for use. So the philosophy here is make data available and let folks who are interested in using that data use the metadata to inform their choice. So, okay, moving on. So that was guiding principles. I'm going to just give you a preview of the draft goals as they exist now, and I could also, we have a little bit of a residual slide from as soon as the draft goals seemed awesome to a handful of folks. another handful of folks decided that maybe they should be recast. And as long as the concepts stay there, I know as somebody who was happy with the first set, I can live with the second set too. The point is that we want to make sure that it's complete, represents all of our interests, and gives us space to define objectives, strategies, and actions that support those outcomes. So I'll quickly hit the draft goals, and I'll give you the example. So make data sets accessible. The philosophy again, get the stuff out there and let people start innovating with it. Build and support an open data platform. Second goal. Obviously, the legislation doesn't give us a choice about that, so we will embrace that opportunity and build and support that open data platform. And then we will move on to making data useful, and we'll talk more about that. And then improving water management decisions. Again, an ultimate outcome that we are all hoping comes from 1755. So 1755 talks about data, but really the inspiration is on informing water management decisions. So under making data sets accessible, we just have a simple example here to kind of show you, and we're still, it's very early, even though it's also very late, and so, because January 1st is coming up, but we are looking at how to characterize the subordinate items to make those goals real. So as an example, an objective would be to identify data needs. And one way to start identifying data needs is to catalog a series of use cases for water management decisions. And so this date that says by February 2017 is just an example because we had a workshop, actually we've had a couple of workshops that focused on writing or developing use cases. And I have to unpack use cases because to different people that means different things. But for us, the way we're using use cases is to identify ways in which a user would expect the system to behave. And so, and questions of specific, concrete water management questions that need to be answered using data. And I guess I'll steal my own thunder later in the slides. We have a description of that use case as who needs what data, in what form, for what decision. So that's how we are looking at use cases. But in doing that, we have operated with the belief that if we get a handful, a good representative handful of use cases together that detail what questions are being answered, what data is needed to do that, what form that data exists in, and who needs to use it, what type of user, then we believe that we could design a system that responds to that body of use cases. And if I'm sure I'm talking to engineers and scientists, so I can use this phrase, we believe that we would asymptotically approach the majority of uses of the system. It doesn't mean that we'll have thought of every single use, and it doesn't mean that we will have ever answered every single possible use, but we will have reason to believe that we're pretty close to the majority of uses. So, so writing the use cases is one way that we could identify data needs, and then one action that causes us to meet that strategy is to identify data needs for individual use cases. So we could say, as I just mentioned, we might, in fact, we did, through 2 workshops earlier this year, we ended up compiling mostly complete use cases for 8 different questions. And I know I'm going to have to look around the room to have somebody add for me. I always get about 7 of them, then I stammer. But we had an environmental flow question. We had SGMA-related question having to do with the groundwater surface elevation. We had the one I was on. Oh, investment decisions for investment in a groundwater recharge facility, for instance. So costs and benefits and the area and so on. And then that was the first workshop, and then we had 5 more, one having to do with the water budget that you've all probably heard about today. We talked about climate change in the Delta. We talked about water transfers. I'm missing 2. Someone jump in. What were the other 2? To get the idea. So it's a bit of a range. Again, I want to be super, super clear. We do not intend to suggest that that's all this system will be used for, or that by itself constitutes the variety. There's still some areas of water management that are not widely represented there. But our hope was that we would have a materially close characterization of uses. And then, in fact, this summer, I continue to steal my own thunder. I know what's coming, but we'll get there, and then we'll have more time for conversation. This summer, we actually opened it up and asked folks out there at large through the Water Plant e-News to let us know if there are other use cases that they use that they, where, you know, for instance, like you might assume that a portal, an existing data portal, is really established and developed to answer one or a handful of concrete questions. Is it safe to swim today? What is the water quality of such and such a water body? So those kinds of portals answer certain questions. It's fair to presume, by the way, that government-required reporting really is aimed at certain questions. So we have been trying to collect as many use cases as we can, and we will invite folks to continue filing those with us. But in so doing, then we give ourselves an opportunity to challenge that design. And the sooner we get those, the more likely we can challenge that design to be more comprehensive. Okay, I'm going to move on unless there are questions of clarification here, because I want to make sure we have time for conversation later. Okay. So I mentioned we have the strategic plan, and in the strategic plan we'll talk about guiding principles, and we'll talk about goals and actions, strategies. We also, as I mentioned, on January 1st have to produce protocols for data sharing and access and all that wonderful stuff that came in the legislation. We are operating with these beliefs that we, as we develop protocols, which would be standards for sharing of data, we must find a balance between the rigor of those imposed requirements on data stewards and the level of participation we hope to get from data stewards. So in other words, if we put on onerous requirements, say pages and pages of metadata that you have to come up with before you can post your data, we'll probably have less data. So we are operating with the belief that there is a sweet spot somewhere between those two that allows a user to have a fairly seamless experience, but a more complete body of data to query. We are also looking for balance between metadata standards and platform functionality, and also looking at a balance between data set protocols and the customer experience, which I guess I just hinted at. So there's a little bit of natural tension on all those points, and we are hoping to find a good, suitable middle ground. And I think we've had some really good discussions so far on that, and I look forward to sharing, not today, but sharing soon with you all in a public setting what those draft protocols might be. We are, as was mentioned earlier, expecting fully that the platform will evolve. Like I said, by its very nature, it will challenge us. You know, we will be asking people to use it to innovate and do new things, ask themselves new questions, and so when they do, we are likely to find that the needs will outpace the platform, so we'll continue to try to mature it over time, not to mention the way the IT sector changes constantly. I don't think I have to sell that point. So we'll look forward to it evolving. And one of the facets of the legislation that I actually didn't give a lot of attention to because it didn't come with a deadline, but is well worth mentioning, is that the legislation permits the department to enter into a partnership, public-private or interagency or other. And I'm always reminded to say this, but now I want to set it up so that you understand what I mean by this governance entity. But the ongoing care and feeding, if you will, of this platform is going to fall to somebody. And obviously the department is responsible for it with our partners, the other state agencies. But there is this opportunity for us to pair up with others, either in the other entities. We were given a fund, without funds, but we were given a fund in the legislation where charges for maintaining this platform could reside, but the actual fundraising component of that and the actual decision making about how the platform will be either governed, you know, decisions about protocols, or how investment decisions will be made, all those things are still really very much up in the air. So we see them as something that the strategic plan will begin to talk about, but we recognize that once we move out of the project mode and into the ongoing operation and maintenance mode, there will need to be a governance entity of some composition, and that entity we'll need to decide how and how quickly protocols will change. Will they become more stringent? That group will decide that. And we hope very much that all of us implementing agencies will be part of that group, but we don't know that we'll be all of that group. Now this is where I keep stealing my thunder from. So there are a number of parallel efforts ongoing and have been ongoing that we are absolutely leveraging to inform our implementation efforts. I mentioned the workshops that were aimed at developing use cases. Those have been co-hosted by DWR with the California Council on Science and Technology, who have been here today but unfortunately can't join us right now, and UC Water, which includes a number of UC campuses. And speaking of enthusiastic partners, they too have jumped in and brought a lot of energy. So those workshops, again, two workshops aimed primarily at bringing together use cases, inviting folks to join us in those discussions, going toward who needs what data and what form for what data-driven decision. And out of those, also, and I don't know how many of you, let me stop. How many of you get the Waterplan e-news in your inbox? Good, 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 good. I hope you take a chance to read it. It's always full of great information. One of the things that was announced about mid-August was first the existence of the use case discussion, but also the Open Water Information Architecture, OWIA for short, System Requirements Document. And that was developed, drafted by John Helly out of UC San Diego, who I'm sure has played a prominent role in this room all day, certainly with the water balance conversation. And so he had put forth for DWR and others to consider, actually a group of folks from around the country, including a librarian, by the way, a library scientist, but given us an example or a write-up of an architecture system or architecture for this system that would support and have traceable requirements that trace back to those use cases. And I can't do it justice. It's deceptively short. It's only about 20 pages, and it's very, very dense. The man is brilliant, and a lot of other brilliant people weighed in on the thing, and I invite you to take a look at it. You're probably, you may be more acclimated and get more from it. I wanted to let you know that we closed we had a comment period that went through September 1st, so in theory, at this point, that's closed. However, I think, yes, however, in about, well, at the very end of November, November 29th, DWR and those partners, the UC Water and CCST, as well as our state agency partners to the extent that they are interested, we will host yet one more workshop in the fall here, November 29th. Note it on your calendar because it's only going to be, it'll be limited seating, but it should be a really, really good dialogue on a couple of different fronts. One, those who attend will have an opportunity to comment and challenge the Open Water Information Architecture document a little bit more. And I have folks in the room who can speak to the details on that if you're interested. And also this notion of data-driven, data-driven decisions, which actually is put forth as we design this, we should have in mind the decisions that would drive the data. So it's a little bit of it's meant to be a comprehensive look at how we design a system and how we try and answer questions going forward and how those two actions relate to one another. So that's UC Water's product. So those two efforts we are taking liberal inspiration from for our purposes on implementation. It will be actually, other than today, one of the first big chances to collaborate with the department and its partners on, so for all of you as data providers or data consumers, to collaborate with us on 1755. We'll have some deliberate dialogue about the strategic plan and about the protocols and explain the relationships among all these things. And finally, we will take this opportunity at the November 29th workshop to talk with folks about what their plans are and what opportunities they see for us and for themselves in terms of 1755 and really beyond that. Matt kind of mentioned that before. We're embracing this opportunity to advance water management and water management decision making more broadly than just the basic requirements of 1755. This final bullet, which may really be my final bullet, is meant to be a placeholder. I wanted to let you know, and I kind of hinted at it already, but they're in the same way that we have these parallel efforts that we're leveraging to the hilt for conversations about architecture and functional and technical requirements, and also strategic goals and ambitions for data management in the long term. We are under the impression that there may be a parallel effort. It's still very much in its infancy, but if you're at all interested, let me know. We'll get you on our subscriber list, because as this becomes hopefully a reality, there will be an opportunity for a body of folks to start really diving into the questions about funding and governance. And it doesn't mean that we all have to be there to hear it. It's just so exciting to know that conversation is happening, because the ongoing survival of anything, if we build something brilliant and it's there, and then we get a new governor and then it's not, I think that would be the big travesty. And I know I'm not alone in that. So what we're really, really interested in is how do we make sure that this platform continues to exist and continues to answer questions and survive administration changes and funding. You know, I don't know how many of you were in the funding session last time, but yeah, we know funding goes up and down. We know that public education training doesn't always happen. So we're looking at how do we make sure that this system will survive for the long run. So there may be a side conversation on that we'll be able to leverage to some extent, and then look to that group to give us more thoughts. So that was my very last bullet. I'm going to stop talking. I would like to have you all talk. You can ask us questions. And I also want to, Gary, you weren't here before, but Gary Darling in the back would have been someone I would have made introduce himself as well, like I did to Rafa and to Matt. But Gary has also worked on this and actually works closely with John Helly, who developed OWIA. And so if you have questions specifically about that, whether you want to ask them now or afterwards, I would encourage you to think about talking to Gary. But before I ask the group to ask us questions, what refinements or improvements would you like to contribute to? Did I leave anything out? Anything you're passionate about that I didn't talk to? Machine readable, I know, machine readable. Data standards, yes. Okay. What's that? Interoperability, yes. Oh, I did say I would talk more about usefulness. Yeah, 1755 doesn't specifically call on us to make data useful, but we look at that as actually the key part. Making it accessible is just beginning. Making it usable is what really matters. So our strategic plan will focus on that, and I'm pointing at Matt, but I'm not going to make him talk. You can make him talk, though. Any questions from the group?
I would ask everyone to give a hand to Chris.
Okay, so given that the most immediate need for data right now is for development of groundwater sustainability plans, and given that the GSAs who will be putting together these GSPs are mandated by SGMA to create data management systems in the same time frame that you will be doing this at the state level, have you thought about convening an advisory panel or something of that nature with representatives from GSAs who will be developing in parallel their data management systems to try to identify ways that you can streamline or intersect, not for this round, obviously, but into the future for the interaction, the going back and forth of the data and data sharing?
I can't give you a solid unqualified yes, but what I'd like to say is that's a great idea. I will give Matt a little time to think about what he might like to say about CNRA a little bit and SGMA. But while I let him think about that, I will also respond that, and I don't know if I gave this good treatment, and I'm sorry, I'm making everyone turn around. I don't know if I gave this the right treatment, and I don't know if, Leslie, if you'll feel like this exactly relates to what you just asked, but we do appreciate the fact that a lot of, like, GSAs are just the latest in a long line of people who have to submit certain data on certain schedules for certain purposes, or they have to submit certain plans. And so we absolutely appreciate that it would be highly beneficial to the state as a whole, never mind to just state government, but to all of us if there were a place where all that data ultimately would get brought in and put together, maybe recompiled so that you don't have to report in 45 places, right? But instead that it gets centrally reported and the appropriate reports come out of that and information. And we appreciate very much that possibility. We haven't dug quite into that, but I think there's a lot of room for discussion on that point in the strategic plan. And so we will definitely bring that in there. And then as far as like a really concrete example about whether we're doing that with the with the GSAs and, you know, for their GSPs, I can't say that we already are, but I like it. Matt, do you mind saying a few words about CNRA, and do you feel comfortable doing that? Just the data reporting in the near term.
I certainly can. I probably have an unsatisfying answer for you largely. We're certainly using a number of the Sigma data sets to kind of pilot a open data platform through the Natural Resources Agency that will be used to get state-held data sets out to local agencies. But at this stage, kind of given Sigma's very tight timelines, we're not necessarily looking at kind of the standards for how that data is going to be provided from GSAs to the state. So I guess just to kind of give an early plug, hopefully coming sometime early November, we'll have a data.cnra site up for sharing a number of data sets. Really the goal is these data sets would have kind of consistent documentation behind them. There would be an API so end users can programmatically query the data sets. There would be identified data stewards for questions. And really the hope is that this is kind of a first step, and we're really looking for a lot of user feedback to kind of quickly tell us what they love about the system, what we could do to make it better, and also trying to crowdsource some of our QA, QC of our data sets as users kind of use and experience the data. I think it's highly likely that you will find kind of gaps or areas where the data can be improved, and so we're looking for a feedback mechanism.
Thanks. And I'll just add to that, and I'll look to you to let me know if I'm misstating this, but or repeating you. But so the CNRA stands for California Natural Resources Agency. DWR is one of the subordinate agencies under there. We have like Fish and Wildlife and Forestry and Fire and Parks and Rec, everything with an and except us. And you know, as a contrast, then the State Water Resources Control Board reports under Cal EPA. That's their agency. CNRA, we are fortunate, I think, at DWR to have our CIO for DWR is the same person as for the agency. So there's a lot of cooperation right now in terms of that platform that Matt was just referring to. We're looking at Sigma as essentially sort of a ramp-up customer for that platform, and then the implementation of 1755 will undoubtedly originally incorporate the CNRA platform, but we are hoping, again, with the emphasis on interoperability, to go beyond that in the fairly near future, where all of these systems can play with one another and give the user a more seamless experience. But yeah, still, with your thought about the advisory group and the GSPs, I like that concept. Maybe we can talk some more offline about that. But yeah, it's not something we've stumbled over outright, but we are cooperating. And in fact, we share staff with Sigma on that product. So we're hoping there's some natural interference there. Yeah, Gary. Oh, yeah, please.
This morning when John Helly was doing the OWA, we got a question from, I believe it was San Luis Obispo County, and I had not foreseen the notion that the water balance work that DWR was doing could be useful to local government. It wouldn't really much matter if they posted it to us. They were interested in the code so that they wouldn't have to reinvent what we just written, and it would be even nicer if they could just push the post button and then post it into the platform. So this is something we hadn't seen until this morning and something we haven't thought through. But yes, I think local government, for its own reasons, wants the code, and perhaps we could look at some sort of open source thing that would solve some of the Sigma problems, and it could also solve some of the open data problems. But it's not thought through at all, just came up this morning.
Sorry if I missed this, but I was wondering if the strategic plan will explain a little bit about what is meant or what's included under water data. A lot of that seems very clear, but I'm wondering, you said NOAA, are fisheries populations, is that water-related data? And I guess a follow-on to that, for agencies that are not DWR or state, we're very lucky we have a lot of data here, but if you have reclamation or fisheries, what does it look like? How do you incentivize them to provide data in a format that works on the platform?
I'll try to capture all those, and I don't know that I have great answers for them, but I want to try and speak to them all. Actually, fish abundance is one of the specific, it's one of the few things that kind of those two words appeared in order, so I have to assume that the count, the population is part of that. I also wanted to share with you something I find hilarious. So, you know, I've been in water with DWR actually for more than 2 decades, and so, you know, water's water, whatever, and people who regulate water, water's water, whatever. But our friends from Fish and Wildlife actually have said with a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek tone that to them water's only just been a place that fish live. So they're like, what's this water data business? So they have, you know, they sort of are on the outside of that from their perspective, but it is obviously, and in the last conversation there was a lot of talk about the interrelationship between the gray infrastructure and the green infrastructure, and so there is a lot of you know, it's hard to draw the lines, but I don't know if it would help to flash up what data is required, but basically our strategic plan, because the general nature of a strategic plan is where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there from here, the where are we now and the inventory of data probably will be included at least by an appendix reference. So yeah, we do need to do that, and I don't know if I'm quite getting to the point of your question, but I'm hoping I'm talking around it enough. Is there anything I could speak to more directly? Okay. All right, other questions? Is 1755 something you already knew about and thought it was an idea whose time has finally come? Because I know a lot of folks are like, oh, finally. Sigma, oh, finally we can talk about groundwater, right? So in some ways it's like, hey, that's a great revelation. We should probably make all the data that we collect with public funds available to the public. That's a good plan. But it is a big deal in some ways because a lot of the folks who collect data are barely funded to collect the data. And we see, and again, I'm thinking of the financing conversation, we see general funds, and in particular with something that otherwise has gone so unsung as data, although today is a testament to the opposite. But because data has historically been underfunded and disregarded and forgotten because it's just so foundational, a lot of the folks who collect the data and manage the data, they're barely funded to do that. And the thought of now needing to come up with, you know, a little bit of metadata to back that up, and somebody who's officially going to be on tap as the steward to deal with that and stuff. This is still a little bit in a good way, but it's a bit of a challenge for folks who have worked in that world without having to do all this. So I think it's a good time. There's a lot of flux around all these things, and I think it's an exciting time. But it doesn't seem that revelatory, but it is. In fact, some of our partners have commented about how some of their data isn't even electronic. You know, they have ancient records that are in boxes or on somebody's hard drive on an Excel file. So making data ready to be shared, it's not an unwillingness, it's a resource issue. So it's a good time. It's, you know, it's exciting to see change, but change is hard for some. So other thoughts, questions? Oh, I'm not going to let you out of here without working a little bit. I just want to check in with you in particular about our, you can comment on any of the things, the guiding principles too, although those are heavily borrowed at this point. But as a brief encapsulation of goals, how do you feel about these? Not necessarily the objective and strategy and action, although you're welcome to comment on that too, but the concepts of making data sets accessible, building and supporting, making data useful, and improving decisions. Have we sort of, the group in this iteration had thought, just let's walk through sort of the natural development of making data available, but have we overlooked anything? Is there anything you feel like shouldn't be there? Any thoughts? Probably kind of mom and apple pie, huh? Yeah.
Thanks. Linda Doran, I'm with Sacramento Regional SAN. And I'm curious how the QA/QC portion, because of bringing all the different data sets together from wherever they come from, have different levels of QA/QC associated with them. So how do you address that in your goals to make people totally comfortable with using the data and supporting the open data platform?
I'll try to respond, and again, I'll invite my colleagues who are also involved with this to add to or improve what I say. But left to myself, I first want to start by saying that all the many conversations that we've had so far about strategic plan goals and so on, there is some recognition among the team at this point that some of the objectives will appear under more than one goal, or some of the strategies will appear more than once. And so when I heard your question, if I heard it correctly, where does QA/QC fit? I have to think that's definitely got a part in making data useful. It's not maybe solely there, but it's definitely there. I also think that in terms of making data sets available or accessible, if we're making rules for data stewards on either their metadata requirements or their other process flows to get the data actually published on the platform, there will be a place for that to be considered. So I think it's going to show up in a couple of different places, but I'm not sure, am I answering your question? Or?
Yeah, you are, but I'd like to add that good water management decisions are based off of good quality data. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, go ahead.
Each agency has to be responsible for their own QA/QC. So the data has to come to the platform already through a QA/QC process. So the protocols, so what they're going to do, they're going to check that they're in compliance with the requirements of AB 1755. So the protocols are going to set some standards about data formats, data dictionaries, metadata, things like that. But the original QA/QC data has to be done at the agencies who are responsible for the data sets.
And Gary has,
There's a more formal description of QA/QC in the Open Water Information Architecture, and it deals with raw data and then provenance for that, the changes that have made, who made those changes, when, and then a digital object identifier before it gets archived. So we can let you see the formal document, but there's lots of pages on how that's supposed to go forward.
But yeah, and so, oops, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, if your question was like, how come I don't see it explicitly, I'm hoping it will come up in all of the actions or objectives that support those goals. So, but keep talking to us, because that'd be good. Again, if you're interested in going on November 29th, mark your calendar, start paying attention, because that should be a really good discussion. It will be in Berkeley. So there's some travel for some of us who come from around here, but maybe for some of you it's a short commute. We do have very little time to get to the finish line on the strategic plan and the protocols, but we will hope to engage folks and have a lot of rigor in the review. And then we also, I will speak for myself, I'm not even DWR when I say this, I'm hoping that we can not only do a great job with the statutory deadlines, but actually plan to be on a regular cycle with the strategic plan and have regular review of the protocols by whatever governing body. It's going to have to be iterative, and we want to instill, and it didn't show up in the guiding principles, but we really do want to engender a culture of ongoing improvement. So there will be a lot of dialogue over the time. So, other questions?
Someone may have touched on this already, but was there a visualization component or anything like that?
We haven't actually explicitly touched on that. I will start talking, and I will look to my colleagues to add to it, because they are probably technologically far ahead of me, but I will say that 1755 actually doesn't require any of that. So with the timelines we have, we are trying to make sure that we are constantly paying attention to what we're required to do, and then hoping to reach past that, not reach past that and forget what's required. So, so we're kind of in a walk mode and hope to move toward running later. But I will say that in terms of making data useful, I like to think that we could have some statements about actions and strategies that have to do with visualization and analytics. You know, we can reach far beyond. It doesn't mean that it'll be, you know, say February 2018, but we do hope, this is how we hope that the strategic plan can kind of lay out a path for the future and sort of express what's possible and then try to assign timelines to that. So the visualization is definitely something that's needed and I think helpful to decision makers who, like me, are not deeply entrenched in data and data systems, but need that information to make a thoughtful decision. And so visualization is critical to that. So usable. Yeah. Did that help you? Okay. And there's a question in the back.
Sure. My name's Dave Ossie with 34 North. We've been building a data platform for a number of years and have been working with the agencies for a while. We have been working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife for their DJFMP, their Delta Juvenile Fish Monitoring Program, working with their Denver office to create web services, so we'd be happy to share that experience with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I really like your list up there. We're excited about making the data sets available. I think making the data useful has been our biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Everybody likes to look at their data differently. They like to pair that data differently, and just making it available is more than half the battle. But that last mile is quite a challenge. So
yeah,
we've been talking with Gary. We'd be happy to share our experiences.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, good. And what did I want to say? I was reminded when you started talking about that system that something that I want to make sure. How many of you, and I don't know how many of you might, but how many of you, show of hands, already go to an existing portal or something like CDEC or CDEN, existing resources on data that you feel like I already know where to go? I don't know what all this fuss is about, because I've been told that too. And so I want to make sure, because in like the space of a few days I had 3 questions. Well, how does this interface with CDEC? Are you guys getting rid of CDEC? No. This work will never replace or supplant those portals. It's not the intention, I don't think, of the legislation. It sure isn't the intention of the implementing agencies to replace existing portals. What we instead want to focus on where we can is interoperability, which again is a farther reaching goal. We're not going to be interoperable right out of the gate, but we are going to articulate those as goals and action strategies. And we do hope to see a lot more interplay among data sets, but we are not replacing CDEC. And you know, we are not replacing the portals that the California Water Quality Monitoring Council operates. They're beautiful. There are a number of useful portals out there. This is not meant to be a portal. It's just an interface or a point of entry for people to get more information in one place. That's the goal. Any other questions before? I know we're out of time. Abdul's standing up.
So we're going to have an adjourn. Let's thank the presenter